I'm sure everyone listening to this is familiar with the term New World Order, quote unquote. A term which was popularized by all of the usual suspects because in some old writings by more usual suspects, they openly referred to a New World Order, right? Presidents of the United States have mentioned this phrase in speeches like George Bush did in the early 90s. And what the usual suspects did is they took that term and co-opted it in a way that it was just turned into a big joke. That is how the majority of people, if you did some informal poll, by now they've all heard that term, but they associate it with the clown car conspiracy theory version of it. That's kind of what I imagine when I think of that term and what they have done to it. It's a clown car, which is appropriate for a clown world, right? And it's a bunch of clowns stuffed in the car shouting New World Order with a megaphone out the windows as it drives down the road. But you get what I mean. It's this sensationalized, almost too incredible to believe version of it. And as a result of that propaganda technique, no one really takes it all that seriously, or at least most people don't. And in recent years, that's taken on a completely different energy because they have used their propaganda campaign to associate people who talk about the New World Order with domestic terrorism. They've really shifted the energy into something that's more than just a joke. It's actually a danger to the future of the world now, because this isn't something that's isolated to America. Although, of course, it is the most popular here. And it's interesting what they've done. They created that idea of a conspiracy theorist through the media, and then at the same time, they rebranded the New World Order into the Fourth Industrial Revolution. This is what they now refer to that plan as. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution is a much better way to refer to it now that the groundwork has been laid and they're actually rolling out different aspects of what will become the New World Order. Because in the history books, it will be very easy to refer to a Fourth Industrial Revolution as an organic, technological innovation that was unstoppable and not in the control of any one person. This was just technology evolving. No one was in control of it, and no one could stop it. And that is the narrative that they will go with. And this is similar to the way that they rebranded global warming into climate change. Climate change is a much more effective propaganda term because the climate is always changing. How can you argue with that? And so you can attach anything that you want. So anyway, I want to get into the Fourth Industrial Revolution and focus on some of the main aspects of it now that it is being openly promoted and discussed. The first article here is from Forbes. U.S. lost over 60 million jobs. Now robots, tech, and artificial intelligence will take millions more. If we didn't have enough to worry about, COVID-19, a nation divided, massive job losses, and civil unrest, now we have to be concerned that robots will take our jobs. The World Economic Forum concluded in a recent report that a new generation of smart machines, fueled by rapid advances in artificial intelligence and robotics, could potentially replace a large proportion of existing human jobs. Robotics and AI will cause a serious double disruption, as the coronavirus pandemic pushed companies to fast-track the development of new technologies to slash costs, enhance productivity, and be less reliant on real-life people. Here we have our first major coincidence that the COVID-19 pandemic, which of course will be referred to in history books similarly to the way that they will refer to the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Indeed, they will discuss them in the same breath. They'll be in the same section of the book. I mean, assuming there are still books at this time when they actually write about it in hindsight. But this is what they will say. Well, we were just totally caught off guard by this worldwide pandemic. And as a result of our response to this completely natural development that no one had any control over, all of these companies had to react. And the first way that they reacted was to fast track the development of new technologies along the lines of things that automate processes without the involvement of human beings. We were forced to adopt these new technologies. We didn't have any choice. And it's funny, right? A lot of these companies and organizations were probably thinking, yeah, that might be useful to introduce these new automations that would increase productivity, but they were dragging their feet. They didn't want to change. They just didn't have the will to get it done. And then, hey, here comes the pandemic, shuts everything down, forces a reorganization of supply chains, and forces a large reorganization of the labor force as well. What a perfect time to introduce these changes, especially ones that are going to automate certain processes and result in a bunch of human beings no longer being needed for those jobs. And this makes more sense when you think about how, especially early on during the pandemic, large multinational corporations like Walmart were allowed to stay open while small businesses, mom and pop shops, as it were more likely to be shut down. And obviously, there's nuance here. There's no general rule. It depended a lot on where you lived, whether or not you could be open as a small business. But hopefully you see how that ties into the reorganization of the labor market and the reorganization of supply chains, the push to automate the labor market further. Because, of course, small businesses are less likely to force mandates on their employees, viewing them as actual human beings, whereas the large corporation with shareholders doesn't view its employees in the same way and will gladly force certain types of mandates on them. Plus, another part of this, if you listen to Kevin O'Leary, those of you in America will know he's on Shark Tank. He said that among the companies he invests in, based on their internal analytics and polling, upwards of 50% of them have said that they're never going to come back into the office based on their experience during the pandemic. And he kind of extrapolated this to mean, well, it's probably going to be similar in the larger economy. Now, sure, there are certain jobs and sectors that simply don't have this choice. They have a job that requires them to be at the job. But I hope you see, as we go further here, that automation is going to affect those jobs the most and take them away in large numbers. Surely at some point there will be a return to the office in most places, if it hasn't happened already. But I hope you see how even that small shift is going to play into automation as well, because they're not thinking of it currently, but eventually the analytics in the company will say, well, this person did their job at home with far more productivity than they ever did it in the office. We can probably just outsource that job to someone else who works from home. We don't even need it in our company, right? Which will only exacerbate the problem. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to every job. There are some highly skilled corporate type jobs where the employee has leverage and it can dictate this sort of thing. And that's the story Kevin O'Leary ultimately told. Was one of the higher ups in his organization came to Kevin O'Leary and said, hey, look, I'm never coming back into the office again. I'm moving out to this farmhouse and I'm going to work from there. And Kevin O'Leary honestly said, well, this guy is a key part of my organization and I don't want to lose him. So I said, sure, you got it. Obviously, everybody doesn't have that type of leverage, but the larger trend is a great reorganization of the labor market as a result of the pandemic in many different ways, both through automation and just in general the way it's structured. And as it pushes further towards digitization and automation, that trend will only intensify the reshaping of it. And as a part of all that, you also have commercial real estate, which would cease to exist in an environment where offices were less customary or less used. So they have to think of something to do with the office spaces. And as I'll get into later, that ties into all of these banks, Wall Street firms, investment corporations that are buying up houses and property like this at a record speed, and especially the commercial property that they're then turning into leasable living quarters. And as they buy up suburban houses and make it more and more difficult to afford a house, this will push especially younger generations into leasable, affordable housing closer to the city clusters, which of course is an end goal design of the megacity smart region infrastructure. And actually, now that I think of it, I'm going to put something that Kevin O'Leary also said in right here that's very interesting along these lines as well.
You think of your basic company in America, let's say 50% of its sales go through retail. I'm talking about consumer goods and services, which is about 65% of the economy. So 50% go through retailers like Walmart, Target, Bed Bath & Beyond, that kind of thing. And then you got about another 40% going through Amazon. That's how big Amazon's become. Now when you sell it through a retailer like Walmart, you make about 50 cents on the dollar. You sell it through Amazon, you do a little better, you make about 60 cents on the dollar. However, you don't have the benefit of getting the customer's name. That's the big thing about Amazon. And then most companies have 10% from their own websites to consumers. Okay, you got that. Now, here's what happens. Retail shuts down last March. The companies that made it all did one thing very successfully. They basically went online. They set up their own websites. So they standardized on Shopify. Then they standardized on DocuSign. Then maybe for security they standardized on CrowdStrike. Basically they were using technologies like Wix.com to enhance their whole platform, their video, their product support, pictures, stories, animation, graphics, all that stuff. They were basically doing this because they wanted to entice people to buy direct from them. And those companies, they went up in value like crazy, even in the middle of a pandemic. Look at what happened to a Zoom stock or Shopify stock, you get it. But they were empowering America to go digital. That's exactly what was occurring. Now, think about it this way. Instead of selling something through Walmart or Target or Bed Bath & Beyond where you made 50 cents on the dollar, you're now shifting your sales direct to consumer where you make 100 cents on the dollar. So people say to me, why is the market exploding? Why is it going up in value? Well, the market senses a new America, a digital 2.0 America, an America where it's very productive and where a lot of products are being sold direct to consumers at very high gross margins. That is something brand new, really new, and very interesting. And so it's not just small companies, big companies are doing the same thing. Nike, 50% of its sales direct to consumer all around the world. This is a global phenomenon that's occurring. It's amazing what's happening. And as a result, we've accelerated the digitization of our economy.
So again, major coincidence in the context of everything else that we know, this pandemic, as Kevin O'Leary said, accelerated the digitization of the economy. Anyway, moving on. Millions of people have lost their jobs due to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, and now the machines will take away even more jobs from workers, according to the World Economic Forum. The organization cites that automation will supplant about 85 million jobs by 2025. The World Economic Forum says there's nothing to worry about since its analysis anticipates the future tech-driven economy will create 97 million new jobs. Currently, approximately 30% of all tasks are done by machines, and people do the rest. However, by the year 2025, it's believed that the balance will dramatically change to a 50-50 combination of humans and machines. That's a full 20% increase in the amount of machines that will be involved, the amount of AI automation that will be involved. In a 3-year period, that's a major change. And the only thing that will facilitate such a major change is something like a major crisis that forces it to happen. This is from Time magazine. These advances make AI an easy choice for companies scrambling to cope during the pandemic. Municipalities that had to close their recycling facilities where humans worked in close quarters are using AI-assisted robots to sort through tons of plastic, paper, and glass. And of course, once the machines are in there doing the job, well, all the analytics will support the idea that it is way more efficient to use the machines than it was to pay these fallible human beings who can get hurt and injured and need to rest. Well, all the analytics will say there's no way we're going back to hiring the amount of employees that we had, so these will be jobs that are lost forever. And sure, it's true, as in the past with innovation, it will create new industries and, in theory, new jobs, but this is a much different change than, say, the one that went from an agrarian society to a more urban, manufacturing, industrial revolution-based society. In that change, you still actually needed the human beings in a one-for-one replacement with the work that was being done. They just went from working on the farm to working in the factories or working somewhere else in the cities, and then a lot of those farming jobs that were lost weren't necessarily as detrimental as many of the jobs that are lost now will be when there's no direct replacement. Now, of course, you look at the state of the food system in America and across the world, but especially in America, and we can see, oh, this wasn't a good thing that transpired, where now we have these multinational corporations that don't care about us at all, manufacturing our food in a way that is terrible for the soil, first of all, and secondly, terrible for our bodies as a result, based on what they're using to produce the amount of food that they do in. So automation is one of the major trends that is a part of the fourth industrial revolution. We're going to see this revolution in AI automation across a wide range of industries, and it's going to have a significant impact on the labor market. From their perspective, from the managers of this plantation that is planet Earth, from their perspective, this will produce a lot of useless eaters, quote unquote, as Kissinger referred to us as. There is going to be a lot of displaced individuals, and they have to figure out what to do with them. So again, we're in the realm of coincidence here in noting that this natural, organic, out-of-nowhere pandemic raised the death rate significantly over the past 2 years. And who did it affect the most? Well, it affected the elderly the most. Food for thought, right? Considering we have a large population of what are referred to as baby boomers about to retire, and they will be accessing various government services, and they will no longer be contributing to the system. Here is an example of automation. This is Flippy 2. Burger chain White Castle took an original Flippy for a fry-making test drive at one of its Chicagoland locations, and Miso Robotics used feedback from that pilot program to improve its machine. Flippy 2 takes over the work for an entire fry station and performs more than twice as many food preparation tasks compared to the previous version, including basket filling, emptying, and returning. White Castle extended this test that they had with Miso Robotics that will now go out to 100 different stores, and this is what it is. I've turned it to mute because the music was intolerable. But you can see here, this is their machine that fills the fries in the bin and then puts it into the fryer and mans the entire station. And this is a good time to talk about the problem with discussing these types of things. Because in theory, if we were in a vacuum discussing this issue, and you came to me and said, hey, we have this technology that will allow human beings to not have to do menial physical labor tasks anymore. They won't have to do these back-breaking jobs. Well, if you came to me and said that, I would think that's a good thing. Yeah, let's do it. As someone who's worked these jobs at various points in my life, yeah, that's a good idea. And you can do the same sort of logical reasoning with a lot of these things that are presented to us as innovation or solutions. In theory, a lot of them make our lives easier. Even if you told them at the same time, hey, there's going to be a lot of people who lose their jobs as a result of this, a lot of people would still take the optimistic view and say, yeah, well, it's still going to create more jobs in the long run, and we'll just retrain these individuals and we'll reorganize. We'll get through it. We're industrious people. We'll figure it out. The problem, of course, is we're not discussing this type of thing in a vacuum. It's attached to many other aspects of an agenda that is designed to completely enslave human beings. So you have this cognitive dissonance going on where you're trying to explain to somebody why this is bad. Because in their mind, they're thinking, like I just said, oh no, this is a good thing that human beings wouldn't have to do these jobs anymore. But they're thinking that in the context of the world that they exist in right now. Thinking, oh, it will make my life easier, but not being able to see the big picture of all the ways that this agenda is going to swallow them up and not allow them to have a voice anymore, to not allow them to deviate from what is approved anymore. When you put all the pieces together, that's the end game here. It's worldwide communism, a neo-feudal vision of the future where we're back to kings and serfs. And of course, if you go back to what it was like then, when it was kings and serfs, you understand that, yes, those human beings who are still around will just be working the king's land in some way, shape, or form, contributing to that ecosystem, but they will have no ability to be free in any way, shape, or form. Because another part of the collective mind that would hear this sort of thing and be behind it is the proverbial starving artist. You tell somebody like that, hey, you as a part of this new future will get a universal basic income that will take care of all your needs. You won't have to work. You can focus on everything that you want to express, all the art that you want to do, whatever it is, a painter, a sculptor, a writer, whatever. But of course, they don't realize that they won't have the freedom to express themselves. There will only be approved art in whatever form it takes that is allowable. And any other kind of art will be underground if it's allowed to be seen at all. In any event, that's a good example of cognitive dissonance and how it works when you're describing these things, because there is always the portion of individuals, I mean, in market terms, you would say bears and bulls, right? There's always the bulls, as it were, who are optimistic about the future, no matter what they are faced with. And those are the kind of people who you come to with this sort of thing, and they say, oh, automation is good. This is going to be revolutionary in a good way. We'll have universal basic income. We won't have to do any sort of menial tasks ever again. We'll just be able to enjoy our time. But again, they're using the current context of their experience to inform that optimistic view. What happens 30 years from now where they've updated the terms and conditions of being a part of society to include the fact that you must upload your consciousness into the system in order to be a part of it, right? What happens then when we get to that stage? Well, there's no turning back once you're there, but you don't see that end goal 30 years from now when you're viewing it in the way that they sell it to you now. In other words, what happens 10 years after the initial introduction of universal basic income when the terms and conditions set by the government change And they've now decided that in order to continue receiving the payment, you must donate a kidney to the government for scientific purposes, or else you no longer receive the payment. So it's either donate a kidney or starve. I know it doesn't sound fair, but this is what we have to do due to the great kidney epidemic of 2035. Now, obviously, I'm using a bit of hyperbole here to make a point. I'm not saying that will happen. A more practical way to look at it would be something along the lines of, well, we're seeing here in your records that your carbon footprint has been much too large, and so in order to continue receiving your CBDC UBI, we are going to need you to refine your movement for the next 2 years to this quadrant. You cannot travel, you can't do these certain things, and you can't eat these certain foods. And provided we track you in everything that you do, because it's set up like that now, and you adhere to our guidelines, then yes, you will continue to receive the payments. And oh, by the way, if you say something that goes against the party's commandments, because of course by now there's only one party, we reserve the right to cancel your payments at any point in time. And again, even that's a little bit hyperbolic, but hopefully you see where this could be headed if it's in the wrong hands, the issuer that is. And that is the ultimate cognitive dissonance that people don't see. If you view it in a vacuum and assume that someone with good intentions is implementing the program of universal basic income, it seems like a great idea. But that's the one assumption that just isn't the case here. And that's what you guys all need to figure out. Anyway, moving on. This is a similar thing, food served up robotically at Beijing Olympics. There's this whole process where the entire thing of producing food has been automated, and it's delivered down out of the ceiling through a mini drone that's connected by a wire. I could show a little bit of that. It comes out of one of these little pods in the ceiling, and it's this meal that's been prepared in the background here by robots. And then, of course, they will all... Oh, I can't even say that. I'll stop myself. But you could probably go where my mind was going based on what was on the screen. It'll be time to eat when apparently breathing doesn't matter anymore, right? You can catch my drift there, I think. Anyway. Obviously, this is another major trend that is a part of the fourth industrial revolution, which will be the cashless society, the elimination of physical currency. And this article here, Australia is eliminating physical currency, expects to become a cashless society by 2031. The country could go cashless as early as 2024. Since 2019, banks have removed 3,800 ATMs across the country, representing over 1/3 of Australia's cash machines. The top 4 Australian banks, meanwhile, have permanently shuttered 459 branches. CBA, Australia's largest bank, now has just 875 branches, compared with 1,200 before COVID-19. At the same time, the bank has cut ATMs by more than half, down to 2,000. So, of course, the banking system knows what is coming. They are strategizing for this. There's actually a quote from Bill Gates out there where he says, banking will always be necessary, but banks won't always be necessary. Yeah, that's a paraphrase. It's something along those lines. But, of course, he knows the agenda. So he's telling you, hey, there's always going to be banking, but the banks, as you think of them, aren't always going to be around. And we can see the early signs of that. As they push the cashless version of society, as they move everyone completely online and get rid of physical cash, there's no need for a bank anymore because everything's a 1 and 0 on the screen anyway. So you don't need a physical banking location, or at the very least, you need very few for the few people who still insist on getting out cash, the people who lag behind. But again, it's just like everything else that they do. There will be some sort of crisis that pushes the people who are straggling behind the pack, there will be something that pushes them to adopt and get rid of cash altogether. And the banks are getting out ahead of this. They know what's coming. And obviously this ties into the digital IDs and the CBDCs that I got into in prior videos. Low-income Chicago families to get $500 a month from Citi as part of a new program. Chicagoans can apply to the Universal Basic Income Program in April. It was one of 4 anti-poverty initiatives Mayor Lori Lightfoot announced Thursday. And we won't put her face on the screen. But this is from February of 2022. Just a month ago, this came out. We can already see UBI being tested in the pilot programs. And of course, it will be extended from there as this becomes more normalized. And we already had it normalized during the pandemic with the payments that we received directly from the government, getting people used to that idea. This is from Mac Rumors. One major iOS 15 feature that we are still waiting for is the ability to add a driver's license or state ID to the Wallet app on the iPhone and Apple Watch in participating U.S. states. Apple's website says this feature is coming in early 2022. So here we go, understanding that the cashless society doesn't mean just currency. It means everything, right? So your physical copy of your driver's license will eventually be an app on your phone. It will be scannable and connected into the infrastructure in the same way that everything else will be connected through the digital ID system. This is a way to get people on board with that initially. So just imagine you're driving down the road, you get pulled over by a police officer, and you don't reach for your driver's license and registration information in your glove box anymore. No, you're just getting your phone out and you're showing it to the officer and they scan it and then boom, it's all in one place. And as things progress, you can envision your papers, please moments along these lines as you try to get into all kinds of different places. I mean, this was the whole idea behind the passports that were proposed the past 2 years, like the Green Pass. Eventually, if they get their way, all these things would be fused together into one singular application. And I covered this in the last video from Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock. And again, we have a similar sentiment here as it relates to automation, where he says, Russia's aggression in Ukraine and its subsequent decoupling from the global economy is going to prompt companies and governments worldwide to reevaluate their dependencies and reanalyze their manufacturing and assembly footprints. Something that COVID had already spurred many to start doing. So here we go, another coincidence. COVID had already started the process that I was getting into, reorganizing supply chains, reorganizing infrastructure, reorganizing labor forces. All of that was being pushed into automation and AI technology as a necessity by the COVID pandemic. And here you have them telling you, and also now this international supply chain system that had existed for the prior 3 decades is now over. There's going to be a reformulation of it. And this is definitely where the CBDCs will come into play, and the Bank for International Settlements will come into play with its basket of currencies that it will facilitate for cross-border payments and settlements. You'll have all that going on as the financial system is reformulated. Like they said, Ito and Narula in their article in the Harvard Business Review, the blockchain will revolutionize the financial system in the same way that the internet revolutionized media. That's all going on in the background. And then at the same time, you have the practical effects of this conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia causing another layer of reformation in the supply chains themselves. And just a quick note, for those of you who don't know about Larry Fink and BlackRock, In Think We Trust, BlackRock is now fourth branch of government. Many people have run with this quote that came from an intellectual at a university somewhere. But it's kind of true when you look at the influence that BlackRock has. And not surprisingly, Larry Fink, its CEO, is explaining a prong of the fourth industrial revolution. And then another prong of that would be our boy Bill Gates. He's in the news again. Rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef. And this is another cognitive dissonance in action example. Because again, if you came to me in a vacuum and you said, hey, we have the technology now where we can completely phase out slaughterhouses and factory farms, and we can just get everything that we need from these animals from technology. We can synthetically create it, and it will have all the benefits that the organic animals contain. If you came to me with that idea in a vacuum, I would be for it, right? I would think, yeah, let's get rid of these horrific slaughterhouses. This is insane that we're even still doing this. The problem, of course, is that there's a lot of context missing from that vacuum that we're viewing it in. First, I didn't create this insane food chain. I didn't genetically alter the human body to require animal flesh to survive. That wasn't me. I didn't do that. But you're in a situation where that seems to be the reality that we are faced with here, that you must consume animal protein in order to survive. And given the history of the person suggesting this, now we get into the promotion of the vegan agenda and how that might have very bad consequences for the human race as a whole, as far as our development and future goes. If we all stopped consuming what our body requires to survive, I mean, sure, the synthetic version might be able to keep us alive, but we would not be thriving in the way that we currently are thriving and have been since we were hunter-gatherers hunting the land. So hopefully you see how they use that cognitive dissonance to get you to support something, because how can you argue when you see these documentaries that show you the footage of what's going on in factory farms? I mean, it's horrific. How can you argue with that? Well, you can't really. But anyway, this is a huge part of the agenda, is the food system and controlling what we put into our bodies. And because they have tied it into the climate change agenda, it's kind of divorced from the issue of, is this healthy for our bodies? Because all of the people they've made hysteric about the future of the planet based on this propaganda known as climate change, well, they are thinking we got to do everything that we can to stop us from destroying the planet, right? They wouldn't even care about themselves. In that context, they would think, well, there won't even be a planet for my kids to live on if we don't do this. And that's how they get past that sort of, is this the best idea for our bodies mentality. And then last, I just wanted to get to, I don't know if this will pick up, but I'll just say what he said if it doesn't. In any event, I'll play it first.
Buy 800 houses a month.
I think if you asked...
Oh, I should say, this is about a growing problem and another part of the agenda, which is all of these huge investment firms, multinational corporations buying up houses in America and other countries and being willing to pay well over asking prices, which is forcing up the price of housing in general, which is locking some people out of buying houses and also contributing to the increase in the number of renters. So this guy owns one of those companies. I think he said they own 80,000 houses in America at this point. But just listen to what he says.
A lot of millennials, and that tends to be our primary resident, they would probably tell you that they don't necessarily desire to own a home or to own a car. And they've grown up in the sharing economy, and for what's important to them is lifestyle, right? And so if they can move into this, what we call a turnkey or hotel-ready home, and have a low-maintenance lifestyle, that's very compelling for them.
Okay. This is what they do. I don't know how else to say it other than this is what they do. Think about what he did here. This is what they will say in the history books, which is the most important part, the plausible deniability. They will say that millennials, a new generation that experienced the sharing economy and had different values than those that came before, wanted this. They will say that we wanted a turnkey ready hotel-like house to be able to just rent. And it's interesting how Airbnb ties into that as well. And Uber and all of the big tech companies that sort of laid the foundation for this mentality to be popular. But they will say in hindsight that we asked for this, forgetting about the fact that they intentionally devalued the currency to make it impossible for one person, one income to support a family, meaning everyone had to work in the household in order to even think about buying a house in the first place. That was the situation that we were in. And now, due to the economic levers that they are pulling as a part of this reorganization, this fourth industrial revolution, they're making it virtually impossible for the overwhelming majority of people to own a home. And in that context, people are becoming renters, but they are going to use this millennial idea that they've crafted in the media as an alibi. They're going to say we asked for this. They're going to say we asked for BlackRock and all these other investment firms on Wall Street to buy up all the houses, increase the price to extreme levels so not many people can afford them, and then say that we wanted that. Which, that's what they do. I don't know how else to say it other than that. Like I said, this is what they do. And this is where everyone got the phrase, you will own nothing and be happy from. Of course, the World Economic Forum said that, but this is the context that they meant it in. In the history books, they will say that millennials and Gen Z wanted this. That's why we will own nothing and be happy. But that is completely absolving them from any responsibility for creating the situation where no one could own anything. And that is the insanity of it all, right? But again, that is all of the tentacles of this agenda, this fourth industrial revolution coming to the surface. The climate change narrative being used to reorganize energy. The Ukraine conflict being used to reorganize cross-border relationships and supply chains. The COVID-19 pandemic being used to reorganize labor markets and corporate supply chains. The movement of goods and services. The introduction of AI automation. The reorganization of the labor markets. What a coincidence that all of these things have coalesced in 2 years. 2 years is a really small amount of time in the grand scheme of things, and yet it's all coming to the surface right now. And they have their scapegoat. They're telling us right now it's going to be millennials. They will say, we wanted this. And most importantly, there is an energetic undercurrent that everyone can feel, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that is rising to the surface. And that is the message of the man they call Jesus. It is rising again in the hearts and minds of people. And that message is the antithesis of the system as it is currently operating. It is the very antithesis of everything that is promoted by culture. And so, like the evil geniuses that they are, there's an anti-materialistic theme to a lot of what the man they call Jesus came to tell us about, which of course was God itself incarnating here to teach us, to help us see. And there are so many lessons, parables, quotes about how none of the things that you own can help you in the end. It's like an old Dave Matthews lyric. Oh, how I wish I could take it all down to my grave. God knows I'd save and save, right? Yeah, if I could take it all with me, sure, maybe I would care about it. But you see, that undercurrent beneath the surface that no one is allowed to talk about in official positions of power, they, like I said, being the evil geniuses that they are, they have taken that sentiment that they know is growing and they have planned it in to what they are promoting as the future in their next iteration of the system, what is referred to as the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's the ideas that they have brainwashed millennials and Gen Z with, that they don't even know they've been brainwashed with, but they repackage it and sell it as the green economy. They sell it as this new version of reality that will be anti-materialistic in the sense that you will own nothing and you'll be happy. Do you see what I'm saying here? Do you see how they've taken that and turned it into the tagline for the future that they envision? Which, of course, is the exact opposite of what they are saying. You will only be happy in the sense of how people were happy in Brave New World, because you will be totally disconnected from reality and from God. It's dystopian in that way, right? But that is what they do. That's how they succeed. They take that kernel of truth that everyone can feel, and then people vaguely, if they're still under mind control, feel that, they're aware of it, and then they see this version being presented to them that supposedly will fix all the problems, and they go along with it. This is why the overwhelming majority of alleged spiritual teachers and gurus promoted by the media are primarily focused on Eastern versions of spirituality. And in the way that those ideas are promoted in the West, it can loosely be described as New Age philosophies, because it combines the two together. This can be seen in the United Nations and its promotion of the Lucis Trust and Theosophy, Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky, on it goes. You will hear a lot of millennials and Gen Z say something along the lines of, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And what they mean by that most of the time, if they're still under the influence of the spell, is they are spiritual in the way that Sadhguru or Deepak Chopra is when they're featured on Joe Rogan or Oprah or anywhere in between, when they have their own TED Talk. That's what they mean. And what is the fundamental pillar of Eastern philosophy? It's the idea of non-attachment, that reality is Maya, an illusion of the mind. So do not attach to it, and you will find happiness in that non-attachment. Or, put another way, you will own nothing and be happy.